The phone rang on a quiet Tuesday night. No hello, no inquiry about my life. Just my mother's flat, impatient voice demanding to know where her payment was. I learned that my mother made a will leaving everything to my spoiled brother, so I cut all ties and stopped her financial support. A month later, she called me. Where's my money? Nothing more. I stood in my kitchen, the smell of garlic filling the air. Then I replied, there is no more money. Evelyn. I stared at the steam rising from the skillet. For a year, I covered her mortgage, her utilities, and every debt Noah racked up. I was a transaction, not a daughter. The silence on the other end felt heavy and jagged. I remember the way she used to look at me like a sturdy tool. Michael, my stepfather, was the only one who saw the exhaustion behind my competence. Now that he was gone, the last buffer had finally dissolved. She waited for my apology. My mind drifted back to the morning everything changed. I had visited her house to help with paperwork. I found the will tucked under a stack of unpaid bills. She didn't even try to hide it. Everything goes to Noah, she had said. She claimed I was stronger and didn't need the help. It was a cold, calculated erasure of my existence. I helped her stack the papers back into neat piles. I didn't scream. I simply decided to stop being the family engine. The silence on the line finally broke with a sharp, indignant intake of breath. You cannot just stop, she hissed. Her voice had lost its rehearsed warmth entirely. Ew. She told me that Noah was in a delicate place and counting on that transfer. I looked at my reflection in the dark kitchen window. I looked steady. My brother was 30 years old and still sleeping in our childhood bedroom. He was sensitive only when it came to his own comfort. The stove clicked softly. I heard movement on her end of the line. A second voice joined the fray, muffled but unmistakable. It was Noah. He asked her what my problem was this time. My mother didn't even lower the phone. She just repeated his grievances to me like they were holy scripture. You are ruining this family, she shouted. I leaned against the cold granite counter. I wasn't the one who broke the foundation. I was just the one who stopped paying for the luxury of the ruins. The entitlement in her tone was a physical weight. I realized she didn't love the daughter who provided. She loved the provision itself. I told her that she had the son she chose, and now she had to live with him. She started to sob, a loud and practiced sound meant to trigger my old guilt. It didn't work. I felt a strange, cooling peace settle in my chest. I ended the call and blocked them all. My dinner was finally ready, and the house was silent. The silence in my apartment felt heavy after the phone went dark. I sat at my small table and stared at the cooling pasta. My phone buzzed against the wood with a violent persistence. Noah was sending texts now. They were a frantic blur of insults and demands for money. He claimed the bank made a mistake. He actually believed his own lie. I watched the screen glow until it finally timed out. My appetite had vanished completely. The next morning, I drove past our old neighborhood. I needed to see the house one last time. The white paint was peeling near the porch Michael used to sweep. It looked smaller and more tired than I remembered. A new crack ran through the front window glass. Nobody had fixed it because I hadn't sent the check. I parked across the street and watched the curtains twitch. Someone was inside, pacing the floor like a trapped animal. Evelyn appeared on the porch holding a coffee mug. She looked frazzled and much older in the harsh morning light. She didn't see me sitting in the shadows of my car. She was pointing at the roof and shouting at Noah. He followed her out, looking disheveled in his silk pajamas. He gestured wildly toward the empty driveway. They were realizing that the gardener wouldn't be coming today. I had canceled that recurring service 2 weeks ago. I felt a sudden, sharp pang of old guilt. It tried to claw its way up my throat. I remembered my father's funeral and how quiet the house became. I had promised myself then that I would keep the world away. But Michael's voice echoed in my head. He told me that strength isn't just about carrying weight. It is also about knowing when to set it down. The roof leaked because they chose to let it rot. A black sedan pulled into their driveway. It was Aunt Sarah, Evelyn's sister, and the family gossip. She climbed out with a look of practiced concern on her face. My mother rushed to meet her, already wiping fake tears away. They were building the narrative of the cruel, ungrateful daughter. I realized then that my absence was their new currency. They would spend my reputation to get what they wanted. The guilt in my chest finally died. I reached for my ignition and turned the key. The engine hummed with a reliable strength that felt like mine. I didn't need to hear their lies to know the truth. Showed the balance I had saved this month. It was enough for a down payment on a place of my own. I had been paying for a prison I didn't even live in. I shifted the car into gear and pulled away slowly. As I drove, a new message flashed on the dashboard screen. It wasn't from Evelyn or Noah. It was from the estate attorney Michael had used years ago. The subject line was short and formal. It mentioned a secondary document that had been filed recently. My heart hammered against my ribs as I pulled over. I opened the file with shaking hands. It seemed that my mother wasn't the only one who had written a secret will. The legal document glowed on my phone screen. My hands gripped the steering wheel as I read the fine print. Michael had anticipated this exact scenario before he passed away. He knew Evelyn's heart belonged to Noah's failures rather than my successes. The secondary document was a protective trust established in my name. It held the deed to the family home, not Evelyn's will. My mother was living in a house she did not actually own. Michael had hidden this. I drove to the attorney's office in the city center. The glass building felt sterile and cold compared to my racing heart. Mr. Henderson greeted me with a sullen nod and a thick folder. He explained that Michael's life insurance had funded this trust. The house was mine the moment I turned 30. That milestone had passed 2 months ago. I held the power to evict my own mother. The realization felt like a heavy, cold stone. I sat in the plush leather chair and breathed. Henderson watched me over his spectacles with quiet intensity. He asked if I wanted to execute the transfer of title today. I thought about the peeling paint and the leaking roof. I thought about Noah's silk pajamas and his lazy, entitled smirk. If I signed, the monthly payments I stopped were just the beginning. I would become their landlord or their ghost. The choice felt sharp and jagged. I thanked the lawyer and walked out into the sun. I didn't sign the papers yet. I needed to see Evelyn's face when the truth finally landed. I drove back to the house, my pulse thrumming in my ears. I noticed Sarah's car was gone, likely fled to avoid the fallout she knew was coming. I gripped the folder against my chest like a shield. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about finally reclaiming my name. I opened the front door without knocking. The air inside was thick with the smell of stale cigarettes. Evelyn and Sarah were huddled at the kitchen table. They both jumped when the door slammed against the wall. Noah was nowhere to be seen. Probably hiding in his room like a child. My mother's eyes narrowed with immediate fury. She started to shout about her missing money. I just dropped the legal folder onto the table. It landed. The room went silent as Evelyn reached for the papers. She read the first page and her face turned gray. Sarah leaned over to look, her mouth falling open in shock. "It is my house," Evelyn whispered. Her voice was thin and brittle like dry leaves. I stood tall and kept my expression neutral. I told her that Michael loved her, but he didn't trust her. He knew she would give everything to Noah. He was right. Evelyn looked up, her eyes filling with a different kind of tears. These weren't for show, they were born of pure terror. She asked what I was going to do to them. I looked around the kitchen I had funded for years. I saw the entitlement and the neglect etched into the walls. Then, the basement door creaked open behind me. Noah stood there, holding a packed bag I hadn't seen before. He wasn't surprised at all. Noah stood in the doorway with his duffel bag gripped tight. His face was pale, but he didn't look shocked like Evelyn. He looked like a man who had finally been caught. My mother's hand trembled against the legal papers on the table. She demanded to know what he was doing with his things. Noah looked at me, then back at her. I realized he already knew about the trust. He had found out months ago. He stayed silent. The air in the kitchen felt charged with a new, bitter energy. Noah dropped the bag and it hit the floor with a heavy thud. He confessed that he had been searching through Michael's old files. He found the deed and realized he was never going to inherit this place. That was why he stopped even pretending to look for work. If he couldn't own the house, he would drain me for every cent instead. Evelyn let out a soft cry. Aunt Sarah stood up and tried to intervene with a pointed finger. She told me I was being cruel to my only brother. I didn't even look at her as I spoke. I asked Noah why he didn't tell our mother the truth earlier. He laughed, a dry and hollow sound that chilled my blood. He knew she would panic and ruin his easy life. He preferred to let her believe she was the queen of a crumbling castle. I felt the power shift completely toward me in that moment. I looked at the kitchen I had saved from foreclosure twice. My mother was staring at Noah as if he were a total stranger. The betrayal by her favorite child was finally sinking into her skin. She reached out to touch his arm, but he pulled away. He was done playing the sensitive soul. He was just a predator who had run out of easy prey. I opened the folder and pulled out a single, typed page. It was a formal notice of intent to sell the property. I told him they had 30 days to find a new place. Evelyn's face went from pale to a deep, bruised red. She started to scream that I couldn't throw them out. I reminded her that family helps, just like she always said. I was helping her learn how to be independent. The irony was sharp. Noah didn't argue or plead like I expected him to do. He just picked up his bag and walked toward the front door. He told Evelyn she was on her own now. He had a friend with a couch and a new plan. He didn't even look back at the woman who had sacrificed my childhood for him. The front door slammed shut, shaking the house. My mother collapsed into her chair, her spirit finally broken. Aunt Sarah grabbed her purse and hurried after Noah without a word. I stood alone in the kitchen with the woman who gave me life. She looked up at me with hollow eyes and whispered my name. I didn't feel the triumph I had imagined for so long. I only felt a vast, empty space where my family used to be. Then, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a notification from the security system at my apartment. My thumb swiped the screen to open the security feed. A grainy image of my hallway flickered into view. A shadow moved near my front door, tall and familiar. It was Noah, but he wasn't alone this time. Bella stood beside him. Clutching the spare key, Noah must have swiped from my purse during his last visit. My blood ran cold as I watched them enter my home. He hadn't gone to a friend's house at all. He had gone to mine. I was trapped. I turned toward the door without looking at Evelyn again. She was still sobbing, but her cries felt like background noise now. I sprinted to my car, my heart hammering against my ribs. The drive back felt like a blur of red lights and sirens. I kept checking the feed, but the camera in the living room was dark. They had already found the base station and unplugged it. They knew exactly where I kept my most private things. I reached my building and took the stairs 3 at a time. The air in the stairwell was stagnant and hot. I reached my floor and saw the door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open slowly, my breath coming in short, jagged gasps. The apartment was a disaster of overturned drawers and scattered papers. Noah was sitting on my sofa, holding my laptop with a smug grin. Bella was digging through my jewelry box. Noah didn't look up as I entered the room. He told me that since I owned the big house, he deserved this one. He claimed Michael would have wanted us to share the wealth. Bella laughed as she slid my grandmother's ring onto her finger. I felt a surge of cold fury that eclipsed my fear. They were parasites, but they were also sloppy. I reached for the phone on the wall to call the police. Noah jumped up and grabbed my wrist before I could dial. His grip was tight, bruising the skin above my watch. He told me to stop acting like a victim for once. I looked him in the eye and didn't pull away. I told him the police were already on their way. I had a secondary silent alarm triggered by the power loss. His face shifted from arrogance to a sharp, sudden panic. He dropped my hand. Bella dropped the jewelry and headed for the balcony door. She didn't want a record or a jail cell. Noah stood frozen, looking at the laptop as if it could save him. The sound of a distant siren began to wail. It grew louder with every passing second, cutting through the silence. I knew the neighbors would have seen them, and the silent alarm was already doing its work. Noah cursed and grabbed his bag, shoving my computer inside. He shoved past me and ran toward the back exit of the building. I stood in the wreckage of my life and breathed. The adrenaline was fading, leaving me hollow and exhausted. I walked to the jewelry box and picked up the ring Bella dropped. It felt light and cold in my palm. Then I noticed something else on the floor. A small, crumpled envelope had fallen out of my desk. It was addressed to me in Michael's shaky handwriting. The date on the postmark was the day he died. I knelt on the floor among my scattered belongings. The apartment felt violated and cold. I picked up the envelope Michael had left behind. My fingers traced the messy ink of my name. The paper was crisp and smelled of old tobacco. I tore it open with trembling hands as sirens wailed outside. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I expected words of comfort or a final goodbye. Instead, I found a small, silver key and a folded map. The siren stopped right outside my building. Blue and red lights pulsed against my living room walls. I ignored the officers at the door for a moment. I read the single sentence Michael had scribbled inside the flap. He told me to look where the foundation was strongest. I knew exactly what he meant by those words. He was talking about the workshop in the old garage. It was the only place Evelyn never dared to enter. He had hidden a final secret there. The police officers moved through my apartment with professional efficiency. They took my statement while I gripped the silver key. I told them about Noah and the theft of my laptop. One officer noted the bruise forming on my wrist. He asked if I wanted to press charges immediately. I looked at the wreckage of my home and nodded. There was no more room for mercy or family loyalty. Noah had crossed a line that could never be erased. I spent the next hour documenting every missing item. My jewelry was mostly accounted for on the floor. Bella had been too greedy and too fast. She had dropped the most valuable pieces in her panic. But the laptop was gone, and with it, my work. I felt a hollow ache in the center of my chest. I realized that my brother had truly become a stranger. He was willing to destroy my livelihood for a quick profit. The betrayal felt absolute. Once the police left, I drove back to the house. The night was dark and smelled of impending rain. I didn't go inside to face my mother again. I walked straight to the detached garage at the back. The wood was silvered by age, and the lock was rusty. I inserted Michael's key and turned it with a click. The door groaned as it swung open on dry hinges. I stepped into the dust and the shadows of my past. The workshop was exactly as he had left it years ago. His tools were lined up on the pegboard like soldiers. I walked to the back corner near the heavy workbench. I pushed aside a stack of old mahogany planks. The floorboards underneath were solid and didn't creak at all. I used a flathead screwdriver to pry the central board up. A small, fireproof box was nestled in the dirt below. I pulled it out and felt its surprising weight. I sat on the concrete floor and opened the box. Inside was a thick stack of cash and a ledger. Michael had been skimming from his own accounts for years. He knew Evelyn would spend every dime on Noah's whims. He had built a secret safety net for me alone. The ledger showed dates, amounts, and a final, staggering total. It was more than enough to fix the house and move on. But then I saw a second, smaller envelope. I opened the second letter and my breath caught. It was a signed confession from Michael about the house. He admitted that the mortgage had actually been paid off years ago. Evelyn had been lying to me about the debt. She was taking my monthly payments and giving them to Noah. My mother had been stealing from me for over a decade. She used my guilt as a bank account. I felt a cold, sharp rage ignite in my veins. I stood up and walked toward the main house. The rain began to fall in heavy, rhythmic drops. I burst through the kitchen door and found Evelyn. She was drinking tea as if the world weren't ending. I threw the ledger onto the table in front of her. She looked at the numbers and her face turned white. I told her I knew about the mortgage fraud. She tried to speak, but her voice failed her completely. She looked truly small. Evelyn reached out to touch the ledger with shaking fingers. She whispered that she only wanted to help her son. I told her that she had helped him become a thief. I explained that Noah had just robbed my apartment. The look of horror on her face was finally genuine. She realized that her enabling had created a monster she couldn't control. Then, the front door opened and Noah walked in. He was covered in mud and looking for more. Noah stood dripping in the doorway, clutching the laptop he had stolen from my apartment just an hour before. Rainwater pooled around his boots on the linoleum floor. He looked at the ledger on the table and froze. Evelyn made a move toward him, her hands trembling. I stepped between them, my jaw set in stone. The air in the kitchen tasted like ozone and old lies. I told him the police were already searching for him. He didn't look scared. He looked like a cornered animal ready to bite back. He tossed my laptop onto the kitchen counter with a thud. The screen, already battered from the theft, flickered but held. He claimed I was the one who destroyed the family. He said the money was rightfully his because I was rich. I laughed. But there was no joy in the sound. I told him about the secret workshop and the cash. His eyes widened with a sudden, desperate greed that made me sick. He moved toward the back door immediately. I grabbed his arm and spun him around with force. My grip was iron, fueled by years of silent endurance. I told him he was never going into that garage. Evelyn screamed for us to stop, her voice cracking painfully. Noah tried to shove me aside, but I stood firm. I was no longer the little girl who stayed quiet. I was the owner of this house and his future. He snarled and reached for a heavy glass vase. Evelyn suddenly stood up and slapped him across the face. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the small room. She told him he had finally gone too far tonight. She looked at the ledger and then at her son. She realized she had traded my life for his addiction. Noah stared at her in total, stunned silence for once. His primary protector had finally turned her back on him. It was the first honest moment between them. I pulled my phone out and dialed the lead investigator. I gave him the address and told him Noah was here. My brother tried to bolt, but the door was locked. I had taken the keys when I entered the house. He slumped against the wood, the fight leaving his body. He looked small and pathetic in the dim kitchen light. The rain hammered against the roof like a drum. We sat in the silence of our ruins. The police arrived 5 minutes later, their tires hissing on wet asphalt. They led Noah out in handcuffs through the front door. He didn't look back at us as they pushed him in. Bella was already in the back of another patrol car. Aunt Sarah stood on her own porch, watching the spectacle. She looked horrified and quickly went back inside her home. The neighborhood was quiet again, but the damage was permanent. I felt a weight lift. I turned to Evelyn, who was sitting back at the table. She looked like a ghost in the flickering overhead light. I told her she had 48 hours to pack. She started to plead. But I held up the ledger. I told her the fraud charges were a separate matter entirely. I would not pursue them if she left quietly today. She nodded slowly. Her pride finally dissolved into the dust. She had no more cards left to play. I walked back to the garage to collect the box. The silver key felt warm and heavy in my hand. I looked at the workshop and felt Michael's quiet presence. He had known this day would come for us all. He had provided the tools for my ultimate escape. I took the cash and the ledger to my car. I didn't need the house or the memories anymore. I only needed the freedom Michael had saved for me. As I drove away, I saw Evelyn in the window. She was staring out at the rain, completely alone now. I felt a flicker of sadness, but it passed quickly. I had paid my debt to this family 10 times. I was done being the silent support for their lies. I drove toward the city, my eyes on the road. The future was a blank space, and I liked it. I had everything I needed in the passenger seat. I reached my apartment and saw a dark car parked. A woman stepped out, holding a thin, legal-sized yellow envelope. She introduced herself as a representative for Michael's private estate. She said there was one final clause in the trust. It wasn't about the house or the money this time. It was a list of names and a set of coordinates. I took the envelope and felt a new chill. Michael's secrets went much deeper than I knew. I stood frozen for a moment. The weight of the paper heavy in my hand. He hadn't just watched over my finances, he had been guarding my soul. I stood under the flickering street lamp and opened the yellow envelope. The wind whipped the paper as I scanned the list. Michael had tracked every penny my mother stole from me over the years. The GPS coordinates in the letter pointed me to a storage facility on the industrial edge of town. It contained everything Evelyn and Noah had pawned behind my back. My father's watch and my childhood trophies were all hidden there. Michael had been buying them back in secret. He was my silent protector. I drove to the outskirts where the industrial lights hummed. The unit was cold and smelled of damp concrete. I used the key from the envelope and rolled the door up. Inside were boxes stacked high with my stolen history. It wasn't just junk. It was the life they tried to take. I realized that Michael hadn't just saved money for me. He had saved my identity from their greed. I felt a surge of gratitude. My past was finally coming home. I spent hours loading the boxes into my car. My muscles ached, but the weight felt like a victory. I found my father's old camera at the bottom of a crate. It was still in its leather case, preserved and clean. I remembered him taking photos of me in the yard. Those memories were no longer tainted by Evelyn's lies. I had outlasted their manipulation and reclaimed my worth. The cycle of debt was finally over. I felt truly light. The legal machinery Michael set in motion moved faster than I expected. By the next morning, the title transfer was official. I visited the attorney to finalize the paperwork and close that chapter forever. I was redirecting the proceeds into a fresh start far away. The lawyer handed me a check that represented my freedom. I walked out into the bright morning air and breathed. The city felt wide and full of possibilities. I was no longer an anchor for a sinking family. I sat in my car and looked at my phone. There were dozens of missed calls from Aunt Sarah and Evelyn. I didn't listen to the voicemails or read the texts. I deleted their numbers and blocked them from my life. They were ghosts haunting a house that no longer existed. I had learned that blood doesn't make a family. Respect and honesty are the only things that matter. I shifted into gear and started the engine. It was time. I drove toward the highway with the windows down. The wind carried away the last traces of my old life. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw only the road. My father's camera sat on the passenger seat beside me. I pulled over at a scenic overlook to take a picture. The view was clear and the horizon was vast. I clicked the shutter and captured the first day of my life. My father was smiling somewhere. I was free,